And we are live. Welcome back, everyone. I'm actually changing the name of the podcast, so it'll be Becoming Alpha Podcast, but it's just a small change. Anyways, today on the show we have Eros Estrada. He's a longtime good friend of mine. We used to be coworkers as well, but he has. We have some stuff to talk about today, specifically his recent pursuit or venture with the Curandaria Quetzal. Is that how you say it?
Curandaria Quetzal, yeah. Well,
Well, do not expect me to say it like that. That's for sure.
the easier way is Curandaria Quetzal.
Curandaria.
Curandaria Quetzal.
Quetzal. Okay.
Mhm.
And we'll get into some stuff about unconventional or traditional medicine and also the origins of the panther symbol that's on the podcast. Just to start out, how are you doing, Elio or Eros? Sorry.
I'm doing very well. It's
Yeah.
been a good last week.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into the podcast and get into my first question, which is basically just tell us a little about your backstory and I guess how you got to here and now alive. But yeah,
Well, so I was born in Massachusetts, but grew up in San Diego. Basically, from about two onwards, I was there. I grew up in a culture of alternative medicine. So my mom, when we were growing up, started to well, she found a program that was teaching about homeopathics, and when she was talking about it to me, I was I think 12 at the time. I just the idea of that kind of medicine fascinated me. So I went along to one of the classes, and I was so intrigued by it that the teacher decided, you know what, you're the youngest student we've ever had. So long as your mom is coming to these classes, we can give you these classes as well. And so I went through the full certification process over the next year and became a certified homeopathic practitioner at the age of 13.
oh
So
my
since that
gosh,
time,
wow,
yeah, so since that time, I've continued to add new modalities to what I do. Um, so more recently, I've added in herbalism and authentic relating techniques, and also a little bit of direct energy work, which is something that I've been doing for a while now. I don't have a set practice. Like I haven't been trained in Reiki or Qigong or any of those kinds of styles yet, but
yet,
I base things, huh?
yet. I like that you.
I'm always interested in trying to learn new things, and I set these things for myself as once I understand this modality, I'm going to go on and I'm going to figure out this one, and I'm going to figure out this one, because even if I don't fully practice a modality, even if I don't delve into it as much as I do other ones, having the knowledge of that for me feels like I can offer that to people as a hey, this style might be better healing for you. Let me introduce you to someone who can do that kind of healing work.
Yeah, I actually have a question about homeopathy. So I don't
Sure.
know much about it. I know that you kind of you almost like you distill it down until it the only thing left is like the vibrational frequency, and immediately that reminds me of structured water, which is interesting because water is a medium for like vibrational
Mhm.
um vibrational like imprint in that way, and
Yeah,
people are doing structured water now, and that's kind of what I immediately thought of. Is there any resemblance between the two?
there's actually quite a lot. So Bach flowers, which is more of the modality that I use, is based on essentially you take full bloom flowers. So you wait until a flower is at full bloom. You place that in water under the full sunlight and leave that for about a day. And during that time, the frequency of the flower at its pinnacle imbibes itself into the water, and then you take off the actual plant matter itself and take that tincture, stabilize it, and that stabilized tincture is what the Bach flowers are. And those remedies are, I use those primarily for mental emotional kind of work. So if you're going through things like traumas, or one of my favorites is white chestnut, which is good for calming the mind. So if you're having racing thoughts, or you can't get your brain to calm down, you're having restlessness for sleep, you can just take a few drops of that, and the tincture will help to still everything out.
So it almost
There,
sounds like you're extracting the essence or like the spirit of sorts or
Mhm.
the almost like the intention or the expression of the plant into a matrix and then you're like taking it in. It's almost like you're taking in the essence of the plant is what it sounds
Yeah,
like.
that's exactly what they are. They're flower essences.
That is so cool. I never got into homeopathy or really anything, so I didn't know much about it. But I mean,
Mhm.
that's so cool. Um,
So, oh,
so where did you go from there? I mean, that's that's a huge thing to be a certified practitioner at the age of 13. Like, where have you gone from there?
well, since then, I've over the years, kind of like I was saying, I moved from purely the medicinal direction to also starting to implement in some counseling techniques, so the primary techniques that I use are authentic relating techniques, which authentic relating, for those who don't know, is a means of um, open, honest communication where you remove yourself from the attachment to your emotions. So when you feel things, you change the phrasing of it from "I am angry," "I am sad," to "I feel angry," "I feel sad." And that separation between feeling an emotion and being an emotion, for me, I feel like helps to be able to give you distance. It gives you the ability to recognize that you aren't your emotions that you feel at every moment. You are you, and the emotions are things that are moving through you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because the wording of things can kind of trap you and almost make you like possess them. So like I am angry, so you make it yours. So
Yeah.
you can use that and you can be like, I am angry. And people often do that with things like, I would say like mental disorders. Like it's almost an excuse sometimes, even like I
Mhm.
am this or I am that. And they take ownership of things that are transient or maybe that are, that aren't them, but that are a process passing through them.
Yes. Even throughout my life, I have suffered from depression and anxiety, or bouts of depression and anxiety. And what I recommend to people, and what I try and do for myself, is to remind myself of, I am feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed right now. These are things that are temporary, and I know that I'll move through them. And recognizing that, I feel like gives me more authority to not be trapped in those states. And it doesn't mean that those states don't exist anymore. It just means that when I find myself in a state where my mind is racing and I can feel myself becoming anxious, I have more authority to stop, acknowledge myself as feeling anxious, and then decide, well, what can I do to treat myself best as I am going through this state?
Yeah, it's almost like you address it from the source because you
Mm,
feel certain ways because of certain things, whether that be in the environment or different thoughts. So the more you access it as something that's going on that isn't, when you identify yourself with it, then you create these little compartmentalizations or these little fractures, like, oh,
mhm.
I am those things. So it creates an angry self and all these different selves that you have. But whatever you're talking about, it seems like you're addressing it at the source. So you're like, I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? Can I address?
Absolutely.
those things, what can I do about why I'm feeling this way?
Yes, and that's something that I feel like is very important, is giving people the authority to realize that you can change yourself. You are not stuck in the state that you are. And while you may feel that the state you're in is challenging, you may have trouble with that state. You may have even been there chronically for years and years and years, and it feels like this is me. But from my experience, I've found that everything is transient. Even those states are still transient. And if you stop and have some breath to look at it, you might be able to see that while you've felt anxious for all of this time, the way that that anxiety has expressed itself has changed, or the way that you deal with that anxiety has changed over the years. And so a part of my practice is helping people to gain ownership of themselves again, so that they can continue to grow out of these states or grow to have more authority in those states.
Well, that's awesome. And I liked what you said about having more authority over it, and it being transient,
Mhm.
because a lot of people think that they're stuck inside of things. And I know you understand this, but it's a fundamental law of nature that nothing is ever stuck. Even
Yeah.
if you feel stuck, change is still happening. Well, you can imagine that you are stuck or that you are still, but you're not. You're changing. Everything changes without you, and without your intention. And that's the thing. Are you going to enable yourself to change, or without your intention, or are you going to put your intention into it and affect that change? Because you're going to change without it, to
Mm,
whatever extent it is. So you might as well put your intent into it. You might as well make it yours. Well, like what you were saying, with owning the process and taking responsibility and taking accountability for it. I think that's really powerful.
yeah. I really like the way you phrase that. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because that's how I used to think, or I still think that way sometimes. But how, everything, people always say, well, what's the point? Or I
Mhm.
heard this on the Joe Rogan podcast once. He was talking about people like, oh, what's the point? And he's like, we don't know, but it's happening. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's going on, and you're you're
Mhm.
you know you're missing out. It's going on, and you're killing your chance. You're killing it. And
Yeah.
are you going to be putting your intent in? Because that's really all we have in the end, is our intent, into the physical. That's all we can do, is put our intent into words, into movement, into all different kinds of things.
Oh, for
And
sure.
yeah, when you align that intent, which is, I think, what you're talking about, is taking ownership, then you can understand that you can only affect this place. You can
Mhm.
only affect the stuff around you. You can't control it. And I think a big part of depression, I want to know if you've experienced this, because I know it's in my experience, is that when people try to control things too much, they get depressed.
Mm. Attachment, as hippy dippy as it sounds, attachment is absolutely the basis for suffering, or
Yeah.
one of the pinnacle ones.
Yeah, it's
When
like one
we
of the pillars.
Yeah, when we find ourselves attached to a certain situation or a certain outcome, we desire that outcome, or we can find ourselves desiring that outcome, and then when that outcome doesn't meet our expectations, even if that expectation was unrealistic, we will find a loss. We set our bar for here, and when reality comes up here, we experience a suffering that's equal to the difference between what we were trying to achieve and where we actually ended up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because, and that's been a huge thing that I'm still overcoming, is letting go of the outcome that I imagine, or letting go of the control of things, letting go of my attachment to how things are.
Mhm.
And that's probably that's probably the seat of suffering, as what you were saying, is our attachment to things and wanting things to be a certain way, or wanting people to act a certain way, and not understanding that there's a natural flow, a process that's individual and also collective. And the
Mm,
process of individuals is, on the microcosm, is its own thing. And then the the macrocosm, where all the individuals meet with each other, and then, there's just so many confluences. And if people can get one thing right, which is like what you were talking about with ownership, is whenever you take back ownership, or what I like to call, the alpha state, which is, the primal state, where you're primary, and you get back to that state, and you start realigning your intention and taking ownership of stuff. I feel like that's where the real magic happens.
oh, absolutely. One of the phrases that goes around in a lot of the healer circles that I'm in, and I love to reiterate every time, is you have to put on your air mask before assisting others. You
Yeah.
are you can't do good work to the world if you're not taking care of yourself first.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you just end up exhausted and fried and physically emotionally drained, and you no longer have the desire to try and do these things. Or you may notice that you're feeling overburdened by life, and it's not, in my experience, I feel like it is the healthiest thing you can do, and honestly the most selfless thing you can do, to take care of yourself. If you can focus on you and helping take care of you, and being a good person for you, you save a lot of other people having to notice that for you, help you through that situation. And ultimately, you just feel happier.
Yeah, I mean, that that's one of the biggest things that I think has been indoctrinated into us from when we were kids in school. This kind of group mind think, and also in association with authority people. The group mind think, where we think about what other people think and what other
Yeah.
people do, before we address ourselves, which is the thing that everything else is. We are the intersection point of all these other things in our life. And so we're
Yeah.
the most important thing. We're like the trunk of the tree. All the branches are weak if the trunk is weak. And that's
Mhm.
kind of the thing you were talking about as well, is servicing yourself. I love the way you put it. Put the air mask on yourself, give yourself oxygen before you give it to other people, because in order
Yes.
for you to help other people, you have to be strong, you have to be stable. You
Oh,
can't
absolutely. Yeah.
hold other people on your shoulders if you are weak. And that is,
Mhm.
and I don't mean in like physically or mentally. I just mean like all around. If
Yeah.
you're not living your purpose, I'm not saying, like, oh, he can't lift weights, he's freaking weak. But when if you aren't living your purpose, if you aren't doing what you want to do and what you're meant to do, then you can't help others. And that's kind of where I usually relate it to. And I'm not condoning like what the Spartans did or anything like that, but the Spartan formation
Mm.
is kind of the peak, or the kind of the perfect metaphor for it. Is that in the phalanx formation, I believe it was,
Mhm.
if one person can't put their shield up, to the exact height, and they kind of did talked about it in the 300 movie. If there's one little chink in the formation, if one soldier is weak, then the whole thing crashes down. And that's
Mhm.
why the whole Spartan mentality is, you know, the individual is what matters. You need to be able to lift your shield. You need to be able to swing your sword with efficiency, with efficacy. You need to be strong under your armor, and you need to be strong in your purpose. and your passion, for them, which was Mother Sparta or whatever. But you need to be strong in your purpose, or else, if we look at the human collective and the human species as an army, as, not towards murdering and killing people, but towards the purpose, towards whatever the culture is, if we look at human beings, human brothers and sisters as soldiers, we need to address the person first so that they can then bring their expression out and their purpose out, and not have all of these things that are blocking that energy from coming out or diverting it into other places that it doesn't need to be. And I think that's probably because a lot of people, like, people deify celebrity type people who are very selfless in the respect that they give a whole
Mhm.
bunch. But a lot of people don't understand that you have to come from a place of self-service to be of service. And that's
Yes.
probably one of the biggest things.
The first person you should serve in your life should be yourself. And to me, what that means is there's a difference to me between selfishness and a self-focused approach to life. When you are selfish, it's taking what could be someone else's, or taking things that diminish everyone else around you. Whereas coming from a place of self-care means that you take care of your tasks first, and you honestly look at yourself and what you need, and work to fulfill that. And then from that point, let the excess go to everyone else.
Yeah.
And that can be in our society, I feel like that's a very difficult concept to grasp for some people. We're always told we need to be strong. You need to, I think our society still has a predominantly masculine focused society. And because of the way the masculinity has come across in our Western culture, we have this idea that you have to be strong, you have to be tough, you have to not show weakness, because showing weakness means that people are going to take advantage of you, or they're going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this new way of looking at medicine, and especially the new ways of looking at the self, with a self focused approach, um, comes from a place of realizing that you can't be strong all the time. You're going to break down. You're going to have things that fall apart. And the healthiest thing for yourself is to be able to approach that and acknowledge those basically faults when they pop up, fix them, and then continue to go forward.
That's probably one of the best approaches someone could take. So whenever something happens like that, how do you go about first kind of like starting to address yourself? I've kind of, my thing is trying to get the distractions out of the way, the things that divert my energy um, away. Things like technology, or even talking, um, all sorts of things. But what's a good thing that you do, or that you advise people to do, that would help get back to that place where you can start servicing yourself?
Mm. So, the biggest thing that I would say is practicing self love. And what that looks like for me is starting to acknowledge what you are capable of and what you're not capable of, and honestly accepting that. Some days you may have a harder time getting out of bed than other ones. That doesn't mean that you have failed, or that you made a mistake. It
That's me.
means that that day you're having a hard time. And for a while, for myself even, I would realize that I had so much judgment for myself when I was not feeling up to the standard that I was setting for myself. And when I allowed myself to remove that standard and to approach myself from, where am I today? what can I do today? What is the best that I can do at this moment? I realized that I had much more authority and that I felt more capable of taking on the challenges that I would face for the day because I could accept that, you know what, this is what I can do. And I can push myself a little bit. I can, acknowledge that I have more energy than I thought I did. And other days it's, well, this is everything that I can do. This is less than I normally can do, but this is where I'm at right now. And pushing myself is just going to be punishing myself. It's not going to actually be causing anything good to happen.
Yeah, kind of like choosing a starting point and not judging that starting point, and that's a huge
Mm,
problem for me. Is especially with waking up, because recently I've been trying to get to the sign on bonus. It's like a referral bonus for Lyft,
mm,
and and I have been having to work, do Lyft pretty late nights,
yeah.
and that has been a problem for me just because before I was trying to get into a routine of going to sleep at like 9:30 and waking up at like 4:35 in the morning, and like getting my day started in such an awesome way. And I was successful about it for a while, but
Yeah.
starting this whole, and it's going to end, I'm going to go back to that routine after this lift thing, but I've just been so exhausted, and I'll feel that self-hatred that comes up, like, God, like, why couldn't you have woken up early, and then you just beat
Yeah.
yourself up about it, and it doesn't do you any good, because no matter where you start, it matters not where you start, but then how you start. In what mindset do you start? Do you start fresh and go, okay, I'm gonna accept that I didn't get as much, you know uh, I didn't I didn't wake up at the exact time, but I'm going to start from here and do the best I can. And that's been a huge thing for me recently, is just accepting sometimes when I don't get the exact outcome.
Mm, yeah, I would definitely agree.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to not feel like you're up to the standards of where you would like to meet to.
Yeah. I feel like that's always gonna be there in some respect,
Mm,
because there's this whole, like, self-love and, like, self-hatred thing, and I feel like to a certain point, you can beat yourself up a little bit, just like, hey man, you could have done that a little better, but you don't
mm,
have to do it. So, like, sometimes I would just get so angry at myself and
yeah.
just create this unnecessary situation. I mean, I feel like that almost, it creates like two selves. It creates like a multiple personality
Oh
thing.
yeah.
You have this self that, oh, you're lazy on these days, and you're not lazy on these days, and it's like, no, you're going through a process, like.
Yeah. What I would also say, speaking to that, is yeah, allowing yourself trying to I had a thought and then it dissipated. I'll come back to it.
That's cool. Okay, well, let's continue. Um so let's talk. I wanted to ask you about the curanderia. I think I said
Curandaria, yeah.
curanderia. Uh, so what is it, and what exactly do you do through it, and just kind of give us an idea of what's going on.
All right. Well, Curandaria Quetzal, first off, the name, what it basically means is it's basically like healing home of the feather or healing home of the Quetzal, which the Quetzal is this bird from the Amazon, or sorry, not from the Amazon, from Central America, It's in Mexico, it's in Guatemala, and the feathers were originally used to decorate the crowns of the Aztec kings. They're these incredibly long emerald feathers. But
Wow.
the name came to me. My abuelito, my grandfather, gave myself and each of my two brothers um, names. Essentially, he gave us Mexican names when we were kids, and then when we turned 13, we were each taken on a trip in our own time and given the opportunity to choose our own name. And so when I was 13, I went to Cancun in Mexico, and I chose the name Quetzali for myself. So
I like
uh,
that.
Curandaria Quetzal is the continuation of that and the kind of the remembrance of my family. But
Wow.
what the actual practice itself is I do what I consider holistic healthcare counseling. And what that means to me is that I try and help people to find a greater happiness in life through understanding themselves, connecting with themselves, and learning techniques of emotional approach, forgiveness, and ability to look at themselves, especially the places that we don't normally want to look at. So things that I consider, I call our shadows.
Mm,
It's the pieces of yourself that may hold you back, or that you may have more fear around, or uncomfortability with. So my hope is to be able to help people to acknowledge these shadows, to acknowledge these pieces of themselves that they have more difficulty facing, and realize that even the pieces of yourself that may seem like they're antagonistic are probably just pieces of you that are trying to help you that are misaligned. I feel like even things like depression or anxiety are just misaligned intention, or a disconnect between the the biological animal that we are and the world that we've come through, the world and the experiences.
wow.
So
That's pretty well said. I immediately, whenever you said misaligned, I thought of like your body being misaligned and then blood
mm,
flow being off and all sorts of different things being off. It immediately reminds me of that.
I think that's very similar. When your mind is not in a place that is ideal, or that you feel like you have things that are keeping you from being able to manifest your intention, I feel like those are just misalignments. They're pieces of yourself that you have either gotten confused with. So ideas that you might have had at some point, or that might have been put on you from someone else, that don't mesh up with the way that your reality is working. Um, it may also just be pieces that need to be looked at and cared for. You may be repeating a cycle of behavior because you're avoiding something. So the behavior itself may not actually be what you want to be doing. But if you take the issue and you open it up, the underlying behaviors and the underlying drives are what is actually needing to be fixed.
Mm. So like you're almost hitting that vein again on addressing the self first in a sense, like addressing the source. Um, and that kind of goes to another kind of a question I wanted to ask is when in I have uh a pretty intense kind of program that I'm developing called
Mhm.
Alpha Energetics because I also kind of I'm pretty naturally work in the realm of energy. I don't coach anyone or have any clients yet or anything, but
Mm.
it might be something I do eventually. I'm not sure, but I just have a affinity for so many different methodologies and modalities that it's just a thing that I imagine and do. And um, probably one of the foundational things that happened to me is kind of an awakening process, is coming to the realization that a lot of people's energy and in consequence their intention is being outsourced. Their their primal energy is being outsourced to many different things through what I call human domestication.
Mm.
And people have a confusion with self and the construct, or self and society. There's that
Mm.
relationship thing that they have a they just like the words, like just the relationship to their thoughts, just the relationship to their emotions. And that's the start of this kind of relationship. And that's kind of what, shamanism or healing, or all of these different energy work things is getting to relationships. And one of them in my opinion is, not going to call what you're doing drugs, but chemicals, helpers, or facilitators in the process. When is it okay, in your opinion, when do you see it fit to introduce a kind of mechanism or a kind of facilitating force outside of the self?
So I would say, first off, I love that question. But secondly, I would say it's up to determining what medicines are going to serve you best. Something that I say often is that the difference between a medicine, a drug, and a poison is dosage, usage, and intent.
Mm,
So the same kinds of substances oftentimes can become, it can move from a medicine to a drug to a poison based on, why you were wanting to use it in the first place, how much of that substance you use, what you
mm,
were looking to get out of, and then what ultimately you allowed yourself to do.
yeah,
So I find that when someone is in a situation where they, in their normal state, them outside of any kind of substance influence, is going to have not be able to necessarily get to a certain point, or doesn't have the either doesn't have the will or the perspective to see how to get to the next place. That's when I would offer substances to assist.
mm,
So oftentimes, the reason that I use herbalism in my practice is because I feel like that door sometimes needs to be greased. There
yeah,
needs to be some help to be able to get that open.
yeah. And that is really awesome because um I kind of had this experience where I'm actually on a fast right now, but I started going on these fasts, and one of them being coffee. And this whole outsourcing energy thing kind of started when I started to kind of experiment with sobriety, and seeing how many things were helping me and how many things were actually
Mm.
hurting me. And one of the things that was hurting me was coffee. And the reason why I asked that question is because I went through this whole process where I figured out that my relationship to coffee, the which is really just an expression of the plant. It's the plant's intention into manifestation.
Mhm.
It's the plant's essence, just like you do with the Bach flower. And my intention and my relationship to it was defining this kind of destructive cycle, that kind of had my body trapped. And when I stopped drinking coffee for like almost a month, I realized that most of my brain capacity was being outsourced to this plant, to this thing. And that's not necessarily the intention of the plant. The intention of the plant is, here are these things, this is what it does for you, and that's it. And what you do with it and your intent and your relationship, if you don't have that down, if you don't have what I call the primal position, or what you were talking about, which was servicing yourself, which is being able to do all the things you can do, on coffee as well, being able to access those states yourself. If you can't, then it takes its place for you. And so I kind of started to realize that that's kind of the fall of of kind of humans in general, the kind of the fall from grace is our relationship to things, and how through that kind of group mind think we've been kind of programmed to identify with things outside of ourselves in a way that's destructive, in a way that doesn't emphasize the self first. It doesn't emphasize us as being primary or primal, which is what that word means. And it's so awesome that you say that, because I don't have anything against coffee or any of these other modalities, but I got into kind of a negative space, maybe I would say. It was just a part of a process, but I kind of started to dislike, I kind of started to walk the line between when should I take anything into me? You know,
Yeah.
when is that point where I can say, okay, I need some help now. Okay, I need some support here. Where is that thing at each point, with each thing? Let's say for mental energy, I want to go drink some coffee, or some kind of healing purpose, something external to me. When is it okay to step aside and say yes and bring something in? And that's kind of that's it's really awesome that you say that, because I think that from my perspective, I came from a place that I just started to see how a lot of people are literally in those matrix pods, in the movie, where they have like, and I see each one of those relationships as one of those tubes that were in his body, like basically
Mm.
depending
Yeah.
on all of these things. I see them as that when you have that relationship. And what I experience going through is basically, I'm not going to call myself Neo, but that's probably, that movie is the perfect archetype for the
It's
awakening.
removing yourself from the system. It's starting to
Yeah.
disattach yourself from things that are feeding you.
Yeah.
And I feel like our society, or Western society, I should say, has done a good job at normalizing a lot of things that are vices. I mean, every day on TV, you're going to see beer ads. You're going to see, I mean, not so much anymore, but people smoke like, cigarettes and everything like that, which we have a little bit of problem with, but especially like liquor, coffee. Nobody thinks about those as vices, and sugar. We don't ever think about these things as addictions, or we don't often think about them as, things that we are doing to ourselves every day. We oftentimes just go through the process of people wake up and they're like, well, I can't start my day without a cup of coffee. There's
Yeah.
no thought. There's no active choice of I want to drink this cup of coffee. It is I can't function without this cup of coffee. And so you find yourself attached. You find yourself stuck to this substance, and the substance is no longer benefiting you. You are addicted, or you are attached to this substance.
Yeah, and that what kind of what I say, because I have this whole thing that's kind of relates to the Matrix, but I call it circus master programming. When people create a dissociation with, and create disassociations with things external to you, like language and like all sorts of things, like society and different things, and they put you in a cage. So that kind of mindset, puts you in a cage. And usually what I say is, where your real inner energy comes from, that your primal self is like a tiger. It's that pure expression. It's, the thing that, makes you eat, or have sex,
Mm.
or want to do drugs, or, any of these very primitive, not primitive, I don't think it's primitive, but primal aspects, that part of ourselves is, that's an animal, that intelligence that works our whole body while we're, talking and putting our intent into the world. That thing, whenever you do something like that, it puts that into a little cage. It goes, okay, this is what's happening now. And what happens is if you don't have a good association with it, kind of like, exactly like what you were talking about, is you confine yourself to a cage before ever seeing the jungle. which is what the inner, the primal, kind of what I call the inner flame, or the primal energy, where you actually create a distance for those things, and you facilitate the relationship, and you can say, no, that's fine, I'm okay with not doing that today. And I'd call it defending the primal position, or defending your autonomy in the world. And that's one of the biggest things for me. That's kind of what I focus on, is that it puts you in a cage, and you're not aware of your abilities and capacities, like what you were talking about earlier. You're not aware that there's even a jungle out there, even though it's around you all the time. And it's exactly like what Morpheus said. The reason why people are in the pods is because they don't know right outside is, a beautiful, amazing, vibrant jungle. And it's because of this. And he says, you live in a prison that you can't see or taste or touch or feel. And this is it's not a prison until you build a relation to it that way. And when you say, I can't talk to people until I've had my coffee, you're creating a prison for your mind. And I know it's a joke, and I make it sometimes too, like in a joking way, but some people it's serious. Like they don't wake up until they get coffee.
I feel like even if you make that as a joke, it starts to create it
Yeah.
creates a routine for yourself. When you speak, you are reinforcing a neural pathway. So when you decide, even as a joke, to say, "Oh, I can't wake up without my coffee," there's a part of you that believes that. There's even if the active consciousness knows that you are joking, the subconscious may actually be saying, maybe like, "Well, I agree. I don't think we can wake up without this." And if you take the time to stop and face yourself during that time and ask yourself, can we do this? You may find your body actually being like, no, no, we can't. So oftentimes it's also why I try and also tell people to be wary with sarcasm. Not to take it out entirely, because sarcasm can help to diminish certain things so that we can approach them. It can set you into a certain state if
You're
you are
breaking out a little
constantly.
bit.
Say it again. Oh, uh, sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
You're breaking out a little bit.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
A little bit. Just 1 second. I think
Okay.
I think you're good.
All right. So, uh, in terms of sarcasm, I feel like when you when you repeat something, even as a joke, you are giving it credence.
Yeah.
And so if you are, especially if you're sarcastically talking about yourself, you're like, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm so lazy." You are telling yourself this over and over and over again. And what might start as a joke eventually might start becoming more reality. You might actually start to notice that you think, "Well, I'm stupid. Well,
Yeah.
I'm lazy." Things glitching?
Yeah. And
Oh.
that's what was that?
Oh, this screen flashed for a second. I was like, "Oh, are we still here? We're good. Okay."
Yeah, yeah. You were breaking out a tiny bit. I'm not sure why. It might be my Wi-Fi, but yeah. We did get the bulk of it though. So that's a huge thing as well, is people, you know, usually I was trying to say something. I'll call it the Yes. So, okay. So that relates to as well, addressing things from the source, or or the self. And usually I make the metaphor, what are you without your sword? And that's a big question that a lot of people don't understand. And the sword just signifies the tool or the technology or the methodology or the modality or the practice or the ritual or the culture or the, whatever it is. What are you when I take away one thing? What are you when I take away, two things, three things, all of the things? What are you when I put you in complete in like an isolation tank? What are you in there? What are you under all that stuff? And I usually make the metaphor, what is Thor without his hammer? Or what is Iron Man without his suit? And usually I say that because that's the true point. Whenever take away everything external to you. And this kind of goes into meditation, is take away all the things that are tools for your intention. So that even means sight, it means talking, it means, um, uh, basically awareness of, you don't have to do this, but awareness of your body, because your body is a tool for the intention and tool for
Sure.
the consciousness. Take away everything, take away your technology, take away food. Even, if you can get down to like a very base level, and you don't have to go that far, you can take away one thing and you can start that process happening. But if you get to a certain point, you can get to that self place and you can spend some time there and really get to see what you're made of. And that's kind of what I mean by, what is Thor without his hammer? Where do you draw your strength? And if you don't know where that is, a lot of other things are going to take the place of it. And there are going to be plenty of people
Mm.
who want that to happen because they profit off of it. And
Mm.
one of the things I wanted to get into, because I know you do holistic work, is, I'm not saying anything bad about positive affirmations, but there's a lot of crap out in the world that always comes in with different modalities of things that are good. So there's always the crap workers who just try and profit off of trends and things like that. But
Yeah.
I just experience a majority of different things, kind of like positive affirmations. How if
Mm.
someone feels bad, they'll just listen to a recording of someone telling them it's not. And I'm not saying it's the worst thing ever. It probably gets a good result, but I feel like what you're talking about is more effective, where you go, okay, so instead of just telling myself everything's okay, telling myself that I feel good about myself, or, all of these things, I can go into why I feel bad, why I don't,
Yeah.
why I feel a certain way. And I feel like that's really important, because I just run into so many, and me and Kate talked about it quite a bit, is charlatans, or vampires, like people who want to enslave you energetically to different things, so that you can just be trapped in there, and they just keep making money off of you, or keep doing whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
And all people like that don't, all people don't have that intention, but there are a lot of people, the majority of helpers, the people who portray themselves as wanting to help you, don't want you to be empowered, they want you to follow them. And
I
I
would
think
say that
that's
that
a
is
big
something that definitely
thing,
comes up. Yeah.
that's a big thing that you do, is you talk about inner empowerment, inner power, and that's really important in today's world.
Oh yeah. I don't need to get anything out of this practice necessarily. My focus is to help get someone the techniques to be able to know how to heal themselves. The best thing that I can see is a client who stops coming back to me. Someone who understands these techniques well enough and picks up on ways to heal themselves that they don't need me anymore. And that to me is a successful practice. Is I
Yeah,
get you to a place where you have the authority to help yourself.
yeah, and that's the opposite, mostly the opposite of the modern medicine model, and I think you wanted to get into this as well, is that people who really
Mm,
want your well-being and your empowerment and your health won't want you to have to come back to them. And that is a big contrast. And I'm not poo pooing on modern medicine. Modern medicine has a lot of use, especially with trauma, with symptom, emergency type symptom relief, you
very
know,
much so.
invasive, kind of like battlefield, real nitty gritty stuff. Like you don't know how to do open heart surgery,
No,
but
no, it's
you
not my
can
stuff.
do other kinds of heart work. You could be supplemental to someone having that experience of a heart attack or something like that. And that's kind of where a lot of people, we're not trying to create this, modern medicine against alternative medicine because they're
No,
supplement.
no, not at all.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's funny because you immediately got on it, but that's one thing that's really happening recently in pharmaceutical stuff is opioid addiction and all those different things, and creating that system where the client has to come back or else they don't feel well. And that's kind of what you focus on, is getting people to a point where, I'm not saying they don't need anything, but getting them to a point where one day they won't have to come back to you. And then to you, that's like a communication, like, you've made me strong enough. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Branching off that, the thing that I feel about Western medicine is, and definitely, I agree that I don't think it should be a just Western medicine or just Eastern medicine or all of this is bad or all of this is bad.
Yeah.
It's that we have had great research in both departments. Um,
Yeah.
what Western medicine does really well, like you were saying, is it does trauma work, it does surgery, it does fixing a problem immediately. But in the same vein, the downside with Western medicine is that we have such a culture of just get it now, get it now, get it now, that we want a pill to fix the problem now. We want a pill that's going to make it better. And oftentimes, what that actually does is it covers up a symptom.
Yeah.
When your body, like when you have a fever, Western culture typically talks about, cool yourself off, make sure that you're cool and everything like that, where subdue the fever symptoms. And if you look at even European culture, the idea is drink hot soup, cover yourself in blankets, knock that fever temperature up. So long as it doesn't take you to a point where it is physically dangerous for yourself, you're actually doing a lot more good for yourself by going along with your body's natural processes.
Yeah.
You as a human being have been surviving for millions of years, and your body has a lot of knowledge that you don't need to fight.
Yeah.
When the body starts to rebel against its natural nature is when you do need to start adding in supplements, which can come in the forms of either herbal aids or sometimes Western aids.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do need that quick solution,
Yeah.
but
And
being
that's
mindful
a good
of,
point.
huh? Oh, sorry, what were
Yeah.
you saying?
Because I mean, that's such a good point, because the fever is your body's own way of killing things, and when that fails, which it can, because maybe our bodies maybe are not up to the task, maybe some people's bodies are a lot stronger, they're a lot more able to do things, and maybe older people or maybe even very, very young people will have a harder time. But if we take a approach as well that is all alternative or all Western, then we'll never find that middle ground where we can find that point where where alternative medicine is no longer applicable. Let's say when someone gets sepsis, and you're like, okay, we're not going to give them lemon juice and honey. We're going to give them yeah, we're going to give them really intense antibiotics so they don't die. Um,
Sure.
but that point will never be found when if and most people just don't see the commonalities and see how they can be a complete program, and that's, I feel, where people the whole relationship thing comes into play, because people start to identify with a certain way of doing things And I'm not specifically talking about you. I'm just talking about, like, let's say a doctor who's like, oh fuck, fuck alternative medicine, or an alternative medicine person that just doesn't want to have anything to do with modern medicine. It's
Yeah,
like, I think
yeah.
the word is orthorexic, where you just kind of like isolate yourself from the reality because it doesn't agree with what you think.
Mhm.
And I think it's really awesome that you take that kind of approach, because it's what we need right now more than ever, I think.
I feel like a big part of the reason why the alternative medicine movement has gotten so big as it has is because a lot of people feel like Western medicine has failed them. They feel like they have approached problems that Western medicine doesn't believe it can solve, and through alternative means, they've found healing solutions.
Yeah.
And so that suddenly makes this thing that is considered like for a lot of people, Western medicine is the be all end all, and we forget that we're just a step in the process.
Yeah.
This is just the most modern version of medicine, which we've been developing for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
And so we forget that this is only a part of it.
Yeah.
We can only do so much with this. And it doesn't mean we should invalidate all the work we've done so far. It just means taking a look at the system again. And especially taking a look at, like, who's making the money off of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Big pharmaceutical companies are, I mean, the reason everybody talks about them is because they are making millions upon billions of dollars off of people's suffering. And they're not really offering solutions.
Yeah.
They're offering something to cover up the problem. They're offering something that's going to be a temporary fix, but isn't actually going to help solve things. And so what alternative medicine has been attempting to do, I feel like, has been compensating for these places where Western medicine has fallen through.
Yeah. And that's like the perfect way to look at it, because like what I see in the future is all of these different pieces coming together into one thing. And I see a lot of places doing it already, integrative medicine, where they use modern techniques
Yes.
and also our alternative techniques. And I see a future where that is normal, where that is in every clinic, where there's an herbalist in your family physician clinic, where there's
Yeah.
where it's integrated across all levels. That's my kind of like utopic vision of it. But that's the perfect thing, because Western medicine is good for things, Eastern medicine good for things, and even like, medicine from South America, from Mexico, from Africa, from Asia, just all over the place, Middle Eastern,
Yeah.
um, just all different modalities and methodologies can work together. But until people stop identifying with them, or you can identify with them to a certain extent, because of course you identify with alternative medicine, but
Mhm.
being able to again take that self position and step away from it and go, what is this, and how can these two things work together? And that's probably the biggest thing. But until people change that kind of fracture in their mind, where their mind is broken, where they think the modality is them, just as they think their emotions are them,
Mhm.
then they will never be able to incorporate them, because they take anything that isn't them as a threat to their ego, or a threat to everything that they've attained over time. And we also see this a lot we see this in every sector, every level of the government, every level of society, is people misassociating themselves with things in the environment, even with things like thoughts, emotions, and then it branches out from there. Because if at that level you associate your emotions like that, you're going to associate everything like that. And then it creates this kind of it creates this fracture, this instability in the individual, which then creates the instability in the system itself, and it bleeds into all the different systems.
if I could also speak to the people who will associate more with Western medicine or more with Eastern medicine, I feel like part of the reason that a lot of people in our society value Western medicine so highly is because they really haven't experienced anything else.
Mm,
Also, because for so many years, Eastern medicine has been kind of looked as like a secondary medicine.
yeah.
It's been looked down on, or it's assumed that it's alternative science. It's hippie mumbo jumbo. It's not actually real. And if you break it down, you start to notice that, well, herbalism has been used for thousands and thousands of years. Most of our modern pharmaceuticals are made from, synthesized versions or um, other kinds of modifications on herbs, on natural substances. So when you just take the base plant itself, it can serve a similar healing value as these pharmaceuticals. It just might not work in the quickness that we expect it to, or the potency that we expect it to. And I feel like a lot of people have, I mean, speaking to the animal brain, we naturally fight things that conflict with our worldview. It feels like an attack on us. It feels it's you suddenly have something that is being presented to you that your brain interprets as antagonistic to you. And so if you are not conscious of the fact that that is going to be your natural response, I can come up to you and be like, here's some Eastern like here's this herb. This herb is going to do the same thing that your your sleep medications are going to do. Just try valerian root. And people are going to be like, that sounds like a Lord of the Rings thing. You should stop. And that's just their base response. That's what their gut reaction is. And it takes pausing, it takes noticing yourself feeling that reaction and being like, okay, well, let me talk about this. Let me hear you out to be
Yeah.
able to allow some of these people to get into this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's exposure, like what you were saying, is a huge part of it. And
Mhm.
I've taken kava again, which is a super effective anti-anxiolytic, anti-anxiety medication. It's much less toxic than most medications. I mean, close to 80% of all medications not only come from Peru, the synthesized version, or the extraction of the molecule, um, come from the Amazon. I mean, not Peru, the Amazon itself, because it's so diverse. Not
Oh
only
yeah. Yeah.
but most all medicine comes from plants, and that's what people don't know is they use similar techniques to homeopathy. They use distillation, they use all kinds of things to get the essence of the plant out of the thing and into a pill form. And that's
Mhm.
the thing as well, that I kind of have some the contrast between alternative and Western is that most of the time the Western model emphasizes the active ingredient. So
Yes.
plants
Yeah.
plants are an entire matrix of chemicals that all synergize and do different things in conjunction, which is what chemicals do in a
Mhm.
matrix in general. They interact with each other. The whole biochemical process is different things interacting with each other. For instance, like omega 3s and omega 6s, they interact. They in your body do certain things, and when you take a whole plant matrix, a whole plant expression, and you take one part that gives you the desired outcome,
Mhm.
and you leave all the other things that the plant is that's synergistically a part of it, then I think you take a big part of it out. And I think it also is an expression of how Western medicine is very selective with what it does and what it wants and the outcome itself. And it doesn't leave a lot of leeway, or yeah, it doesn't leave a lot of leeway to having whole plant matrices, which
Yes.
I think in some cases can be more effective and less toxic. Because if you took, let's say, kava, and you extracted those specific alkaloids, and then you put it in a
Mhm.
pill, that's going to be a lot more toxic, a lot more stressful to your body if you just had the root and drank the powder or just drank the juice. It would
Yes.
be the whole thing. There's nutrients in there. There's things that are going to mix. It's not going to be as much of a load on your body. There are a lot of things that are contrast to the Western model, that, and again, they're just different. But I think one does things better, one does other things better, and they need to come together, for crying out loud.
Definitely. I feel like what this next move in medicine is doing, and what I hope to continue seeing it doing, is just taking a second look at all these things that we've been doing for years. So looking at these Eastern substances, these Western substances, and starting to really start to decide what we want to be doing to our bodies. We've been looking at the fast solution for years. Now we're trying to look at the holistic solution. So we're looking at what's going to be good in the long term, what is going to be good for sustainability, what's going to be good for you mentally, for you physically, for you spiritually, what's going to make sure that the entire process is working together. I mean, our minds affect our bodies. The emotions you feel, you can literally feel in your bodies. Tension oftentimes comes from where you're stressed. If you'll feel stress in your back if you feel like you're carrying burdens, if you feel like you're having to take weight on for other people. Um, you can actually get heart diseases from feeling, at a loss for love, or feeling, someone going away from you.
Yeah.
So being able to look at people as this holistic approach, being able to not only just approach things from the physiological perspective, but also try to acknowledge, how are you feeling? What have you been going through? What are you carrying with you as you come in? And trying to heal that as well as the body, so that the healing of the body takes, so that the entire process, or the entire person, is healed, instead of just looking at a single aspect of symptoms.
Yeah, and as well, you were kind of going into um, kind of the process of healing, and I feel like energetics and what you talk about has a big part to play in that, because especially when someone has anxiety or anything like that, it goes into like a myriad of different factors and variables that go into what a person does, and how those interactions take place. And just going into like neurotic holding patterns, which is something that happens within a person's psyche whenever they
Mm.
repress emotion or repress things, and that in and of itself creates actual measurable stress in the body. And there are ways to release it, and there are ways to um, to relieve that. But I mean, that's just one tiny part of it. And then you go into all the other things, all the relationships, all the different, and you have to heal your relationship to things. You have to work, and it's
Yes.
not easy. It's difficult. And that's why people don't like going there. I call it the void. And the person I'm having next on the podcast, his name is Tobias Lars. He's like a wordsmith, is what I call him. But he's really good with words. So
Yeah.
he did this post, and he talked about people avoiding and repressing emotion, and he said avoidance, and then he broke down the word, and he made it avoid dance. So you're dancing around the void. You're kind of like looking away from it. You're not addressing it. You're like, oh, I'm gonna go dance over here. You're dancing around the void because
Yes.
you don't want to jump into it, because it's really difficult. It's scary. It's very uncomfortable. And I'll give that to most people, is that it's really freaky to address yourself and to get back to that void space, get back to that kind of your shadow, which is what you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Shadow work is one of the just the gnarliest things. I mean, it's very fulfilling, but at the same
Mhm.
time, it's like you it's just so uncomfortable. And we live in a comfort-based society where for every
Yeah.
discomfort there is a re kind of recomfort. Like hey, you feel this way, here's this, that like one pill solution for everything. Well, what that
Mhm.
does is it just
Yeah.
puts a blanket on the tiger. That's all it does is it just puts a blanket on it, and your body eventually, I kind of talk about this as well, is that the tiger's going to realize it's in a cage eventually, and it's going to realize, hey, this is an illusion. This isn't
Yeah.
the real thing. This isn't source. This isn't the source. And it'll get very angry, and it'll bite the circus master's head off. It'll get real mad. And that's because what you're doing is you're building up kinetic energy in there, because it's like with I kind of privy it to illusory things like pornography is one thing.
Mm.
It The illusion of sex, and whenever people masturbate, it actually releases different chemicals that are it's more like a drug reaction that makes you addicted to it. And that's what it is. It's the illusion, but your body knows that it's not the real thing, because different chemicals are released when you're intimate with someone, when you touch someone. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with getting real releasing things actually, and just getting something to damp the fire down and put a blanket on the fire.
Oh yeah.
Your body knows that it's not the same thing. It knows what's real and what's not real, and it'll build and build kinetic energy until something just not so great happens. You have a breakdown or a panic attack, and I've had plenty of those. um, and that's a huge thing as well. Is your body knows. You don't trick your body whenever you do things.
No, you don't trick your body or your mind. And
Yeah.
if you, I feel like there are people who may not understand their mind well enough to know that they're tricking themselves. But ultimately, your mind knows when you're trying to do stuff to be avoidant or to get out of things, and it can make it very difficult to face yourself.
Yeah.
Sitting with your shadow, sitting with the pieces of yourself that are conflicting with you is, like you were saying, it's a very painful process at times. But I feel like it's what you have to do to be able to move forward. It's my techniques for this, or what I offer people, is that when you feel yourself in conflict, when you feel yourself being driven by instincts or desires that you don't want to associate with, is to take a minute, pause what you're doing if you have the ability, take a breath or take a few breaths, and look at the problem. Sit in that space and let yourself feel what's going on with you. And if you have trouble feeling what's going on with you, then that's where you start, is learning how to allow yourself to feel again. We, I feel like for myself, for a long time, I tried to just do things from just a purely mental stance. I tried to just solve problems that I would find for myself. And eventually I realized that, while I could come up with a logical solution to what was going on, I wasn't approaching myself emotionally. I wasn't handling my emotional health. And I realized that when I would sit with myself, I hadn't resolved the issue. I had just come up with a solution to it that didn't really fit what reality was.
Yeah.
And so I figured, or I've learned that to truly get at these deep issues, you have to be willing to sit and feel things that are out of line. And oftentimes that can be very painful to start. But as you learn to acknowledge yourself more and more, and as you show yourself that self love and that self care in sitting with yourself and allowing yourself to feel, you'll find that it becomes easier and easier and easier over time. It becomes less and less painful to sit with yourself. And eventually, you may find that you can approach yourself with love, with care. When things are out of line, you can, you sit there and you literally say, "How are you? What am I feeling? How can I help you?" And when you know that you honestly mean that, you may feel yourself more willing to open up to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's very well said, and it also segues into, sitting with yourself and actually feeling what you feel, and not judging what you feel or what you think, because again,
Yes.
emotions, thoughts, they come to you. They're an amalgamation of things. They're transient, they will pass. And one of the best things that you can do is sit with something and observe it and feel it
Yeah.
and bring it in. Bring it in, feel that way, be like, huh, okay. Why is this happening? Why do I feel like this? And sometimes it's really hard because we live such crazy, stimulated lives. And one of the things as well I wanted to mention is that, I think I might have lost it, but um, I did lose it. um, sit, gosh, it was sitting with yourself,
Mm.
and then I can't remember. Anyways,
We'll probably circle back to you at some point. You'll just be continuing on and be like, "Oh, that was it. There we go."
yeah, yeah, exactly. So as well, wanted to mention that the origin of the panther emblem that I have on here. So one time when me and Elio used to work together at Uno's, we I remember we were like fantasizing about something, or I was fantasizing about this like kingdom I wanted to create, like a new culture of some kind,
Yeah.
that I'm trying to facilitate now, into existence, but that we were just joking around, and I was only partially joking, but that there would be panthers in this place, because
I
panthers
hope you
like
don't make the culture we were talking about, but like a similar idea could be
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I don't think it would be okay to have what we were talking about, because we were talking about like panthers being around in like a pack of
The
panthers.
electoral system was based on if you want to get a bill passed, you have to actually fight the president, which is a panther in a suit in a replica of the Oval Office. So if you can one-on-one combat a panther, that bill is absolutely getting approved
I
for you.
mean, if you can one-on-one bare hand combat a panther, I feel like you should be king of something. I mean, it's
It
something
it
at least.
means the society is very fit and scarred, which is probably like someone's aesthetic out there, or
If
a good number of people's aesthetic, I should actually say.
yeah, if you survive it, you won't be living for very long. That's for sure. But no, so there's like pretty much nothing more alpha than a panther, I would imagine. If you just go look up videos of a panther. Okay,
They
panthers,
are they are pretty impressive. They'll drag stuff up into trees, drag full deer and everything like that.
yeah, like full like 200 or 300 pound deer, like with their mouths like
Yeah.
up to a tree. They take drugs. They do all
Forgot about that part.
they do. They eat different like psychoactive plants, and like they're so cool. They're the freaking king. They're the king of the jungle. They're the king of wherever they are, and that's more of like the playful aspect of it. But just panthers have their shit together, so they
They have some of their shit together, I'd say. I don't know if they have all of it together, but
I can't communicate with panthers yet, so you know, I don't know about that,
yeah, my,
but
my panther telepathy is still being developed. That's I think it's years to come.
it's kind of a nubile technology. We're not
Exactly, yeah.
there.
I've been able to communicate with turtles, but not panthers.
We're closer to communicating with dolphins than we are
I
with panthers.
believe that they're very close to humans.
Yeah, that's a weird thing too. It's like weird, different. Do you know who? I believe his name is John Lilly. He's like the inventor of the isolation tank.
No, I haven't heard about him.
So, oh my God. Yeah, have you seen Altered States?
No, that's also something I'll have to add to my list.
Okay. Have you seen the show Fringe? You might know that.
I have not seen it, but I know
Okay,
of
no worries.
it.
You know what a float tank is, right?
I do, yeah.
So he was basically a mad neuroscientist. He was a scientist back in the day who did a bunch of tests on people, put them in isolation chambers, which was basically just a float tank, and just completely isolated from any and all sound or anything like that. He did experiments on them, where he would give them like ketamine and other things, disassociative things, or
Wow.
LSD, and he did a bunch of experiments. He also did experiments on dolphins with people, and he created this like modicum of like different kinds and how dolphins and what he called cetaceans, how they communicated like telepathically with themselves and other people and human
Interesting.
beings. Yeah, and that he, if you basically, if you were under a certain state of consciousness, you could communicate to dolphins and communicate to whales and all different kinds of things. I know this is a crazy segue, but he calls because they all have different kinds of, they can all communicate with each other, sort of,
Hmm.
dolphins, whales, and different things because they use the same kind of frequency.
Yeah,
Um, he calls them cetacean nation, so all of the cetaceans are all the different like manatees and different kinds of water creatures.
sure.
And yeah, there's some really weird, interesting stuff. He actually gave dolphins LSD. That was one thing. And did experiments with humans. It's so weird, but it's pretty. It's the weirdest stuff ever, and the government let him do that. By the way, it was all government funded back when LSD was discovered. They were doing some weird shit back then.
I should be more surprised, but I'm not at this point.
You're like, yeah, I'm sure it did happen.
I I'm
Um,
sure the dolphins had a time with it too. Like, of all
I know.
animals, I imagine they're just like, sure, cool, I'm here, I'm good.
Yeah, and that's the thing is dolphins are probably one of the coolest species as well because they also live in probably the best climate, and they all live in this super free system where they get all the food they want. They do
They
whatever.
are, well, I mean, we're seeing diminishing of their natural spaces, but
Yeah.
also like dolphins are dolphins are some twisted animals sometimes.
Yes.
They're very, very vice-driven creatures.
So they can be good or bad. That's the thing. Like most people associate dolphins with being like the helpers or the people that save you and stuff like that.
Yeah,
That
they
might just be,
can.
yeah, that might just be just the good dolphins though. Like
Yeah, they also have some sexual deviancies, which
yes, the dolphin.
dolphins are crazy.
Yeah. um. All right. Well, I guess we can kind of find a closing point, but I just want to say it was so awesome having you on the podcast. It was such an honor, and it was just so cool talking with you. And I'm so thankful that you came on here to share your wisdom and share information about what you do and your practice. And I just wanted to thank you for that.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And if anyone is interested, feel free to contact me at Curandaria Quetzal, and I would love to be able to offer my help to anyone who is looking to try and discover new ways to communicate with themselves and practice techniques for a better and healthier life.
Well, that is an awesome way to end the podcast. If y'all want to find out more about Eros, he also has Instagram handle Eros Eyes, and for the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, please, and check out our videos. We'll be having more podcasts to come. But until next time, thank you. And yeah, awesome. All right.